Okay. Hello, my name is Miles, and today this is ValpoHacks, September 24th, 2020. Um, Today we have a presentation that will be given by Professor Nicholas Rosasco
Yep.
and from Valpo University, and I will let him take it from here.
Okay, so this is a sort of a potted history of where does spam come from. Um, on in front of you is the namesake of the problem. I couldn't not include a picture of the actual spam. uh, I have no idea. This is some random. Uh, I'm probably abusing copyright today, so bear with. But um, spam is the for those unfamiliar or for people the age bracket of my regular students, who view email as this thing old people use, is the term generically used for email that is unsolicited and usually commercial, aka the email equivalent of junk mail. Um, it has been with us for a long time. Um, in fact, it dates back pretty much to the very beginning. There is perhaps inevitably on the internet disagreement. Shocker, I know. Um, some say that this email from 1978, unsolicited from an employee of then digital equipment company, DEC, which became eventually part of Compaq, um, trying to sell not the year 2020, which would be a hard sell, I think, this year, but rather the DEC 2020 product line to a bunch of hapless potential purchasers. This was an fairly early mainframe product. And you notice inevitably it was in Silicon Valley near the airports. Um, and like all sales presentations seem to involve a Hyatt hotel. um, the somewhat more famous first piece of spam is this, uh, and it fully embraces the spammy tradition here. Zoom out a little bit. Um, it is the green card lottery. You'll notice that it has many of the signatures. It is sort of vague. Uh, it is in all caps in many places. There's this sense of urgency and imperativeness, much like getting one's money from the dubious prince on some other continent. Um, and, you know, depending on which school of thought as to what the first, piece of spam is, there's a couple other contenders floating around out there, but all of them have pretty much the same origin story. You notice this is 1994. So we've jumped a couple of decades. Um, and it's also worth remembering that email predates even the formatting you see here. This is actually a news group. Um, Email used to be a lot less convenient, um, which may have been one of the things that kept it from getting spammed earlier. Has anybody ever heard the term bang path before? This is how you used to have to send email. You actually had to chain host names separated by an exclamation point, a bang, hence bang path. And so people's email addresses would be on their business cards with bang paths to well-known internet hubs. It was ludicrously inconvenient and things got lost all the time because email at that time relied very strongly on a thing called UUCP, Unix to Unix copy protocol, which eventually even escaped Unix. It was ludicrously painful. It predates me, but this is still actually part of the heritage of email. When you had to specify things a host at a time, the payoff for doing spam is a lot less because you would have to get very specific. This is more of a historical curiosity. That's why I hope to heaven nobody is still using this. So we'll go back to our canonical image of spam. Spam also happens to be possible because of a very simple fact here. I think this is the one. Some of you have seen this one before. It's one of my go-tos. This squidgy little diagram, and I apologize, it's fuzzy. It is fuzzy not because of the image quality. It is fuzzy because this is actually a close-up of a napkin. It was apparently a very good lunch somewhere, I think, in California. This is the first known map of the internet. Two network guys had a really good lunch and drew it on the napkin while they were at lunch. You'll notice it has two hosts. One, I believe, is at UCLA, and it is dated September of 1969. This is the first known node and host pair. IMP is an internet message processor. It's an early version of a router. I'm not going to blame a good lunch for the fact of the way the internet is designed, but the fact that the first two devices are clearly labeled as to who owns them gives away part of our design problem that's been with us for a really long time. Originally, the internet was built to link existing networks. It was not created to direct connect hosts. It was a network of networks. Does that make sense? Think of the internet has a governing structure. It's pretty loose, much like the city of Valpo has a government. Imagine forming a city government when you can assume every block has a homeowners association. Some people might have an allergic reaction to the concept of an HOA, but, which I share, potentially, depending on the circumstances. But when you know every street has rules, it's easier to build a network on top of it. And that was true. The original internet sites were universities, a small collection of usually DoD or big government in the US connected companies, and some research labs. All of those had their version of an HOA agreement. They had like what we now would call an acceptable use policy. There was even a local cop. He or she was the system administrator or the network administrator. And if you did something naughty or misbehaved or annoying or wrong, he or she came and found you. And it possibly was unpleasant. It was a local employee backed up by their boss, who was probably also eventually connected to your boss as an inhabitant of that network. And thus the internet could get away with not having a lot of overhead. Does that sort of make sense as a systems thing? Are we tracking? Like, if everybody has their own garbage collection and a collection of neighborhoods, there's no reason for Valpo city government to provide that service. Their job is the ring road that links them. That's pretty much it. And that was one of the design philosophies of the internet. The federation concept, not Star Trek, but otherwise, the preserving the rules of the road for each participating site was very, very important. Also, there was a more concrete question at stake. There wasn't exactly a budget in the beginning. There was a little bit of ad hocery going on here. The protocols, the actual software that glues it together, got some money. The connections got money, but there wasn't exactly a whole lot of cash running around to employ a whole staff. Think about that for a minute. Anytime you hear someone going, the internet should have a traffic cop, well, somebody would have to pay that traffic cop. That was not a thing. In fact, the internet began life as a bunch of leased lines. Very expensive, because you only could buy them in the United States from AT&T, long distance connections. So there was an urgency to protecting the expensive stuff. You only used it for things you needed. And if you abused one of the handful of hosts on the original network, someone came and found you and yelled at you. So this is, again, 1969. We have 2 devices. This is 1973. Things are getting a bit more complicated, but see, there's our buddy, the IMP. It's hanging out as this is the first deploy of large-scale routing. And you notice, you recognize names. Oh, look, Illinois. I wonder who that could be. I don't know. The University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, just possibly. Hawaii, Ames, the big federal laboratory. Let's see, SRI, Xerox, UCLA, UCSD, inevitably the Rand Corporation, a perennial favorite of defense contractors and certain kinds of conspiracy theorists. Carnegie, as in Carnegie Mellon, Aberdeen, another big federal lab. Oh, look, there's Harvard. And BBN, which is one of the first builders of this routing equipment. You notice, even now, this map is older than I am. I can, even just from acronyms in these short words, I can identify these hosts. All of the operators of these networks, this is also up in the upper right corner, inevitably MIT. And notice the links, how the links are patterned to try to go, okay, we're going to cluster, like BBN is up in the New England area, so is Harvard. We're going to hang them up to avoid buying a more expensive connection. This is still a driving factor in the architecture of the internet today. It's finding cheaper links. It's just now there's a lot more of them. So this becomes a pattern. Like MIT and Illinois, frequently what you would get on that long haul link between those 2 sites would be, there would be some chip in for the connection, maybe from ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, DoD funding. And sometimes the universities or other entities on each side would split it. IMIT will pay for the call to Illinois. Illinois will pay for the call to MIT. No people were harmed in the making of this map. So that's a fact. That also means to create that, we'll just pick on MIT and Illinois again here, link. There are 2 system administrators or 2 network administrators involved. One in MIT, and maybe a technician from the phone company. Really, nobody else is in that conversation to establish that connection at first. They're going to test it, they're going to verify it, and they're going to make sure before they advertise, and that's the term routing uses, the availability of that link to anybody else, they're going to make sure it works for them. And then they're going to say, okay, have at it, everybody, and hope it doesn't blow up. The hope it doesn't blow up part is also a part of the history of the internet. They didn't know any of this would work. They hoped. A vast amount of the internet's protocol stack has been informed by something blew up and it had to be fixed. A classic engineering model that probably should have a name but doesn't. There was design. They did think about, okay, we have more than 2 sites, what are we going to do here? But this is still 1973. It is not easy to email people. Like you might have to do that bang path thing to move data around this network. It gets ugly. In fact, the first batches of information that needed to go out to all the participants on this map frequently still had to travel by mail. Note the lack of E. They had to be like, anybody, am I the only person on the call who remembers the mimeograph machine?
No, I know of them.
Yeah. Yes.
Never actually used
Like
one personally.
chunk, rather fuzzy, somewhat smelly copying technology that predates the Xerox machine
Yeah.
had to be used, and someone had to stuff envelopes and send information out physically to each participating site. That also meant that the backup, besides snail mail technology here, is a telephone call. Chances are, at the end of creating the Illinois to MIT link, somebody at Illinois had the phone number for somebody at MIT and vice versa. The phrase web of trust, which the cryptography people use, kind of gets born a little bit here. I might not know, as we'll pick on somebody else here, at USC, I might not know, because they're more than a couple hops away from me, MIT's senior network administrator. They're Lord of the Wires. I might not know that person, but I might know the person in Illinois who knows them. And if I see bad data coming to me from MIT, I'm like, crap, I need to call this person. Oh, I know Illinois and MIT have a link. I'll call my buddy. And that's how a lot of the early problems would get worked out. Why does that explain spam? Well, there were beat cops. They all kind of knew each other. Jalopies and bad behavior were restricted from the highway because if you evidenced tendencies in that direction, you probably committed the sin on your local network first, and someone came and talked to you. Also, you know, this thing that we just don't do anymore, much as a society train people on technology, was still a thing because it wasn't all that easy to use. Like, the original mainframes were treated like any other piece of heavy equipment. You were checked out on it. Somebody like made sure you knew what you were doing. There used to be a known phenomenon a little bit later when we get into here, 1992. Notice the map has started to become a little bit more abstract and a little bit more complicated. You can see some usual suspects here. Seattle, Palo Alto, San Diego. I wonder who those could be just on the one coast. There's another phenomenon here. There used to be a known zone of time on the internet that correlated with September. In the AOL got plugged into the internet era, there would be this phenomenon on all of the group discussion systems, news groups, this is pre-web forum, but you know, they're predecessors, where new college students would get their first access to the internet. And there would be a learning process while the community, sometimes loudly, educated them as to what you should and should not do on the internet. Like asking, why is Emacs so good in the VI users forum? If you were a Unix fan, that was a no-no. That could spark what became known as a holy war or a flame war. You just didn't do that. You didn't write certain kinds of provocation because you could actually crash the system. It was still fairly brittle. Or you could crash the person and disrupt the otherwise useful conversation that might have been happening. Trolls existed before the web and Twitter and Facebook. Trust me here. It was a thing. But again, there's no central control point. It's not like a package delivery company. The network by itself has only one job, and that's to deliver digital information, not vet it. There's no choke point except maybe your local system administrator as to where it goes through. And as another nice example here, anybody heard the term RFC before? It actually shows up in other contexts. Request for comment. This is actually an organizational mechanism used by many. And the original things that made the internet work were published like you see here as what's called a request for comment. Somebody would pretty much write an elaborately detailed memo because you had to specify the binary pieces of how you were going to do it. Of, I am going to do this thing on the internet. If you would like to receive data from me doing this, here's how. This is what the bits mean. That comment period, or that comment idea, expresses the way the internet evolved to be governed. It was not do it this way, it's here's how I'm going to do it. Does anybody see any problem? And does anybody have any improvements? RFC 821 and 822 are the first big RFCs. These are the ones that begin the process of email as we know it. One of them, I can never remember which one, I believe specifies the @ symbol as the separator between the user identifier in an email address and the host name. The host name eventually becomes the site name. So SMTP. And again, the names give away are the source of a problem. The protocol is not guaranteeing quality mail delivery. It's, can I get the mail to where it's supposed to be? And the folks who designed this back in 1982 had a very, very familiar model. There is an abstract layer that's making this work. And it's one we all know. It's visual, in fact. It's the blue boxes on the corner. The job of a mail host, which is something specified in the model, is to deliver mail, like the post office's blue boxes. In fact, one of the holy three of mail protocols, SMTP is one, POP and IMAP are the other two, is actually, POP is short for Post Office Protocol, how to pick up your mail. Anybody ever gotten somebody's email address wrong and gotten a message back? The generic email account that's used by tradition is still called Postmaster. And it's not a human being, it's an app. And it's saying, I do not have a person at the address you asked me for. I am that host, I am that post office, but I have no little box to put this in. Please try again. I can, possibly chancing accusations of fraud, go to the big blue box on the corner and put a letter in the box addressed to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with a return address of number 10 Downing Street, London, UK. The header appears to be from the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom addressed to the President of the United States. The box will not prevent that. It can't. Its job, and the job of the human being who opens it and empties it, is to go, okay, can I get it to this address? Well, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. is a perfectly valid address. So yes, I can. And if somebody was goofy enough to say 1700, which is probably, I don't think is an address on Pennsylvania Avenue in D.C., go, well, nope, that doesn't exist. So it will return it to number 10 Downing Street. That's how spam is possible. The header, which is specified way back in 1982 as a piece of design, includes no, zero, zippo, zilch, integrity check. There's no validity in there. SMTP servers, like routers, their only job is to move data closer to its destination. Nothing more. Does that make sense? Does everybody see how spam is also, remember, there is a security measure in the blue box that does not exist in email. Money. If I have not paid the postman or postal worker through the stamp to get the mail to where it's supposed to be, the person in the blue uniform rejects it. That is not true of email. It will just get delivered. There is no, cost, economically or otherwise, except wow, Everett. That was loud.
Hello, Everett.
Stop.
So that's how this works. And if you scroll down RFC 821, you actually see forwarding mail. They're even using the terminology from the post office in the design. Relaying mail. Okay, this post office is overwhelmed, or this post office doesn't have this. How does it move it on? So, and then interestingly, we have even a theory of reply codes, just as we have return to sender in a physical mail environment. We have a notion of like this of error messages, basically. And so that impersonation capability of addressing or the reply to being dummied, and the fact that even the pairing of the display name, so all of this stuff lives in the header. The header is defined by the RFC. I can say I am, Bill Gates by going into my Gmail settings and replacing my display name if I want to. And that's how my email will go out. I don't recommend that. He has very good lawyers. But unless someone looks more closely at the header of the email, that might not be given away. That mail will still get delivered, even though it's clearly not from who it says it's from. Does that sort of make sense? The other one here is RFC 822. Notice we're not even using the word email, internet text messages. And notice that we started to settle on the @ symbol a little bit. And most of this document is actually concerned with the digital mechanics of getting this done. Originator fields, receiver fields. So this is the stuff in the header. Semantics. There was also another imperative here. Don't break what's there. Email, as designed, had to coexist with other mail systems, which was another little bit of a deterrent to trying to lock stuff down, which was its own problem. So like that bang path example, that coexisted for a while. So does that sort of make sense how spam is possible? There is no reason to not send something, if you're going to be annoying about it, to as many people as possible. The header system is going to work its dangest, deliver your mail, and it has no integrity check. Only recently have we started seeing, well, recent to me, maybe less recent to you, I'm old, is this idea like where Google will say, hey, this person's not in your organization, or this header looks a little sketchy. There seems to be a mismatch. Like if I try to impersonate Bill Gates, I'm guessing Gmail's internal checker might catch that on the receive end for you. But it's literally caveated to let the buyer, aka the mail recipient, beware. Now the funny thing is, this sounds like I'm kind of going thumbs down on the email header as it exists. I am not. The flexibility that makes spam possible also allows us to do a lot of other cool things. Like the fact that I have multiple applications that can send email as me without any additional hassle is actually quite powerful. I would hate to lose that. So yeah, and actually even just the formatting here, you can see this was meant to be physically printed. Like this is still formatted for a piece of paper. But you can actually see them explaining an envelope and contents. That's what the header is. The envelope contains whatever information is needed to accomplish transmission and delivery. They were consciously imitating postal mail. And the same way somebody can spew my physical mail inbox with 18,000 offers from some local insurer based on, a known map, that also works for somebody figuring out, okay, chances are they're, for a 10,000 person institution, if I can figure out their addressing pattern, like, like if they use first initial last name, well, if I send A through Z Smith at whatever, I have a high likelihood of getting an email received. And if I'm wrong, I get 26 failed emails. But if I only get 15 failed emails, I now know that those are valid email accounts. It's obnoxious, but it's all text. It's parsable. It's machine readable. And there's no disincentive except somebody unplugging your email account because you've abused it. Actually, this is, wasn't planning on talking about this, but this is a nice notion here. And I've highlighted it. A distinction should be made between what the specification requires and what it allows. A badly done header, an SMTP server is still going to try its darndest to get it to where it's supposed to go. This is in obedience to a larger idea, which eventually acquired a name, and I think he was one of the authors of 821. Yep, Jonathan B. Postel, another historical digression here, and with my apologies. He is one of the founding fathers of the internet as we know it today. One of the things he did as a volunteer service, that's also a defining function of the way the internet works. It's done by people with day jobs. And so therefore, they have other stuff that's competing for their priorities or for their time all the time. Jonathan B. Postel was a employee of the University of Southern Cal, their Information Sciences Institute, but he also was one of the organizers of the internet. And perhaps most famously, nowadays, he was the original editor. Like he was the guy next to the mimeograph machine for the RFC series. Somebody would get him through carrier pigeon to snail mail to whatever, an RFC, he would assign it a unique number so that it could be discussed coherently, and then would send it out to the mail lists, digital and otherwise he had. This sounds incredibly tedious, it apparently was, but he also functioned as one of the cleaner uppers. He would polish some of this stuff before it went out. He eventually would get a collection of hardware honoring him for his many, many things. He unfortunately died a little too early, partly from stress from doing 3 jobs at one time, and a heart condition. But in sort of a charming tribute, Vint Cerf, one of the other founders of the modern internet, wrote an obituary for him that became an RFC in its own right. It was actually distributed through the channel he had maintained for so long, and it was RFC 2468. And there's a joke in that. It's a very intentional one. Anybody get it? My closing thought. You can look it up. It's RF. I'll put it in the chat. Nobody spotted it. You actually don't need to read it to get the joke. Any takers? Okay.
Do we
Like
appreciate?
2468? Like
Who
is
do we appreciate?
Correct.
oh
Sorry. Sorry, I was distracted. Yeah.
That's all right. Yeah. 2468. Who do we appreciate? His co-editor and Vint when Vint Cerf said, "Hey, is 2468 available?" She said, apparently, yes. Why do you ask? I'd like to make that John's obituary. She's like, apparently there was a why moment. And she said, oh heavens, he would have loved that. And so he also, like, the reason that HTTP is port 80 is because John said so. He was the numbers guy. That was one of the other things he maintained with the RFCs, was the well-known ports table. Like just an enormous amount of tedious housekeeping is one of his legacies. And he did all of this as a side gig. It was pretty amazing. He didn't get paid for it. And it's kind of a cool story. But to answer kind of the original question, why is spam possible? Where does it come from? It comes from the very beginning, from the fact that the design allows it because it trusts the host, the participating networks, and ultimately the user. To borrow from someone probably of approximately the same vintage, with great power comes great responsibility. The tool is neither evil nor good. It is merely in the hands of the user. And it's kind of cool. It is annoying. We have spent an enormous amount of technical expertise ranging from whitelists and allowed senders and other pieces of bodge and fix and duct tape to very sophisticated Bayesian spam detection systems to this giant constellation of servers at Google and other large mail designers or mail maintainers to circumvent what is sort of both a design flaw and a design feature that dates back to the 1960s. I will say, despite the age, the design's holding up pretty well. Something that began on a napkin is still working. I think that's pretty cool. That's pretty much all I got. Does anybody have any questions? It's a little bit of a sermon, but it's one I like to give.
No questions, but good talk, Nick. Thank you for giving it tonight.
That was
Yes,
awesome.
thank you very much.
Assign numbers.
does anyone know why it was port 80?
John said so.
Like just but
But like, why did John say so?
yeah. Did he-
My guess is that was probably an unused port.
Hmm.
I mean, it is. There are, for a lot of things on the internet, there is a max number, and then there are conventions about using them. Services, things that are permanently on for a really long time by tradition, lived below 1024. That was the original well-known ports list. So I actually don't know, but my guess is that somebody used 79 and 80 was available.
If you look through if you scour through the list, you see a bunch of other protocols to where it would make sense that they were climbing up and then it got assigned 80. I mean, you see just you got protocols and network systems through, so doesn't seem surprising that by that point they'd be like, okay, protocols have been here. Here's this new one called hypertext transfer. Let's see if it works out.
There's actually a number of spots in the well-known ports list that still are booked by convention for things that are pretty much long dead. But no one's willing to trespass into the list. You never know when somebody's still using something ancient or odd. In some cases it became entrenched. Any other questions? Was this about right? I mean, I never am quite sure. Like when I have a classroom audience, I have a pretty good idea of where they've been, mostly. I can't guarantee they've been awake for where they've been, but they've at least been driven through it.
No, I think it was awesome. I think it was really good talk, Nick.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Really cool.
great. I learned some stuff.
Does that sort of explain why we get all the rubbish we get?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Sorry, I was actually like reading some of the eulogy or talking. It was internaughts used a lot.
No.
As a phrase.
Vint
What ARPA called themselves.
attempted to coin some terms.
Man, I wish
some were
internaughts
successful, one were-
caught on. Awesome.
If you ever have the chance to see Vint Cerf speak, he is always engaging. He's a very good public speaker.
We need
But
to
yeah.
use that word often.
Internaughts.
Yeah. But yeah, IANA, if you're curious, is Internet Assigned Numbers Authority.
Is that
Mhm.
is that like what was that?
That
Just
was
John.
That was John.
Like it literally was
Like
just
that's his
John.
title or a nickname or what?
It was a role.
Oh,
He was the number, like various things required tables of numbers that could be used only that had to be used consistently, like ports,
40.
like port number.
Hmm.
John became the custodian by virtue of being the circulate. Like if you sent in an RFC and you asked for port 79, it was already in use. He probably either would call you and say, can't have that one. How about 83 or whatever? Or he would just change it himself, depending on what it was. It eventually became the IANA role became entrenched enough, like it was seen as useful enough, that it also eventually became a corporation. What's now called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers,
oh,
which is one of the things that also makes DNS work. It's one of the very few central policed things to this day, because at the end of the day, we are talking about computer behavior here. It's got to be a number. The number has to be understood and used correctly, or else things break. But yeah, the eulogy is they were clearly friends. Originally, like even IANA wasn't the term. Vince eulogy uses the term numbers czar, which I think is cooler. You could argue that John was.
I did not know
a
him.
ring to it.
Was kind of the prototype for a certain style of system administrator. If you look up his photo, I don't know if I'm still screen sharing. Yeah, bearded, glasses, sandals.
He had the early computer look.
Yeah. His influence and the respect, which was not just the job he did as a volunteer, but also the way he did it. He was a pretty benevolent dictator, as numbers are. was such that what's now the internet's premier community service award is named in his honor. It was created, and he was its first recipient, posthumously, sadly. But yeah, known for request for comment and Postel's law, which was the other principle. Be conservative in what you do, as in send on the internet. Be liberal in what you accept. So if you get a messily formed email header, still do your best with it. And that also makes spam a little bit possible. But that rule of thumb still governs the way protocols are judged and designed to this day. But this sort of goes back to a central, I don't know if we're still recording or not, I don't know, to a central design tenet of the internet.
Yeah, the recording's still going. I don't know how much longer you want that to go, though.
Make it work. The first job of the network is to make the data move. Err on the side of data getting to where it's supposed to be. It's the recipient's job to figure out what to do with it. That's also true of email. And if you think about, the wackier addresses, like if you misspell your name on a piece of postal mail, or it's apartment 203, but it's clearly addressed to you, the last human delivery step will be, I think that means to go here. That's sort of how it works. I think we can probably kill the recording at this point, Miles. Unless somebody has another email-y or spam-related question. There is a lot more history of the interweb in there. I'm skimming a lot of it, but
Okay.
that basic design philosophy is at its heart true.
All right.